Hey, Carl.
Hello.
Is it just us virtual today?
Laura Jane as well, I think.
Um, I think I'm going to shut everything down until we begin. See you in a bit.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hear the excitement in the room. I'm glad everybody's as excited as I am about to talk about money today. It is 3:33, so we want to get started. Before we get started, I want to read Mr. Frisch, Ms. Cohen, and Dr. Anderson have each submitted written requests to virtually attend today's work session due to personal conflicts. I will now call for a vote from those board members who are in person today. All those in favor of approving Mr. Frisch, Ms. Cohen, and Dr. Anderson's request for virtual participation in the October 5th work session, please raise your hand. Ms. Marin, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Derenak-Koufax, Ms. Tolan, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Pekarski, and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, as well as Ms. Corbett-Sanders. All those opposed, abstaining, that motion carries. Second announcement, Ms. McLaughlin is absent today. So, with that, we will commence our work session on the budget. Today's work session will go from 3:30 until about 6. And let me please begin. As the Budget Committee Chair and Co-Chair, Ms. Tolan and I are very pleased to kick off the fiscal year 23 budget development process with a work session to discuss school board priorities. But before we move to the fiscal year 23 budget development, I had indicated at the last regular board meeting that we would revisit substitute pay increases. So we're going to do that first today. As you all know, we've had great difficulty in providing substitutes to every school that needs them. FCPS does not have an adequate supply of substitutes, likely due to a number of reasons, including the market, fear of COVID, pay rates, and more. Pay rates and disparities of those pay rates among surrounding divisions is a factor that is one that we have some control over. Our acting assistant superintendent of HR, Sean McDonald, is going to go over a few slides to refresh your memory and provide some recommendations regarding substitute fill rates, some details about the demand versus those fill rates, rate comparisons with neighboring districts, recommended strategies, and the superintendent's recommendation. And so with that, what we will do today is if you have a comment to make, please put your placard up on its side so we can recognize you. And we will hand over the mic at this point to Mr. McDonald. Thank you for being here and for all of the excellent hard work you have done to get this school year off to a good start in all of our schools with all the hiring that you've been doing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. All right, so good afternoon. Today I would like to provide you with an update on our substitute fill rates. Even prior to the pandemic, FCPS faced a growing challenge of declining sub-fill rates. We've had a number of conversations at this very table around the supply and demand dynamic related to substitutes. Prior to examining our FCPS data, I would like to provide you with some context around the current state of the job market. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, for the month of August of 2021, the U.S. unemployment rate was at 5.2%. The Commonwealth of Virginia's unemployment rate was at 4.0%, and Fairfax County's unemployment rate was at 3.4%. Historically, in periods of low unemployment, our substitute fill rates have been on a decline. Also, a quick internet search will result in a myriad of news articles, such as the August 5th Bloomberg article titled "Swaths of U.S. Workers Are Missing in Action," or the September 4th Washington Post article with a headline of "Why America Has 8.4 Million Unemployed When There Are 10 Million Job Openings." The authors of the Washington Post article state, "Workers are shifting where they want to work and how." For some, this is a personal choice. The pandemic and all the anxieties, lockdowns, and time at home have changed people. Some want to work remotely forever. Others want to spend more time with their family, and others want a more flexible or a more meaningful career path. This article goes on to point out the fact that education and health services, those two fields combined, have a total of 1.1 million job seekers for an available 1.7 million jobs. So the supply and demand dynamic is not in our favor. Based on this information, we can also infer that a variety of pandemic-related factors, including job seeker work setting preferences, i.e. the virtual environment, and family and childcare needs are contributing to our low fill rates. Looking at our FCPS data, since the start of the school year, our sub-fill rates have trended downward. In full transparency, I do want to point out the fact that given the number of data points along the horizontal axis, it was difficult for the reader to make out the trend line. So in order to provide a clearer view, the vertical axis on this graph has been compressed. But if you take a look from the left to the right, you can see that there is that downward trend since August 23rd, where we opened with a fill rate of 82%, and then on September 24th, our fill rate was at 60.9%. So since the first day of school, the bottom end of our fill rate range, so the lowest fill rate day, was 59.1%. Comparing our experiences this year with that of the last three full school years preceding the pandemic, the FCPS average sub-fill rate is down approximately 20%. So we were averaging between 91 and 94% prior to the pandemic. This bar chart provides some additional details around the total number of requests by day since the start of the school year. The dark portion of the bar represents the number of filled jobs, while the lighter blue bar represents the number of unfilled jobs. As one might expect, the total number of sub-jobs have increased since the start of the school year and is approaching our pre-pandemic level of 1,200 average daily requests. For a market-based context, this slide provides a substitute pay comparison with some of our neighboring Waby school divisions. Across all four tables, the FCPS rate is highlighted in green, and the FCPS non-retiree rate is highlighted in blue. Moving from left to right, the first table provides a comparison of the current FCPS short-term sub-pay compared with the Waby market, and that second table compares our current FCPS long-term pay with the market. Related to a recommendation that we're going to speak about on the next slide in just a minute, the third and fourth tables do fold in a $2 per hour rate increase for both our long-term and then our short-term and then long-term sub pay, and puts us in comparison with the market based upon those adjustments. The impact of unfilled sub-jobs is being felt by our students, staff, and administrators across the school division. When a substitute is not available to cover a teacher's absence, school staff must provide alternative plans to ensure that students are supervised and that the instruction continues. This is creating additional layers of stress on top of the other pandemic-related responsibilities in running schools. Our substitutes play a critical role in ensuring that student learning does continue in the teacher's or the assistant's absence. In order to recruit new talent to our sub pool and to encourage our existing pool of subs to work the unfilled jobs, we are bringing forward a recommendation to increase the hourly pay for our teacher subs as well as our classroom instructional support subs by $2 per hour for the remainder of the current school year. The estimated cost for this initiative is $4.9 million. Additionally, our HR team will continue to collaborate with our Office of Community Communications and Community Relations and other stakeholder groups around advertising our critical need for substitutes. This past weekend, FCPS launched a new targeted ad campaign with the slogan, "Sub and Save the Day." And so we are putting out advertisements targeted at specific populations, our retirees, our parents, college students, and others, with a specific message around sub and save the day. And we're very hopeful that will help to attract additional interest in the substitute role. In addition to these current recommendations, we are also working to refine cost estimates and operational details on 2 additional strategies, which we hope to bring back to the board for future consideration. The first strategy focuses on creating an additional pay band to which individuals who work a minimum of 20 days would be elevated. This strategy would recognize individual substitutes who demonstrate a strong commitment to FCPS by working regularly. The second strategy focuses on providing compensation to our teachers who cover a class during their designated planning period. Again, we do hope that we'll be able to engage in conversations about these 2 strategies at an upcoming meeting. Again, today we bring forward a recommendation to increase the hourly pay of our teacher and our classroom instructional support substitutes by $2 per hour for the balance of the current school year. This table provides an overview of the current and proposed rates for both short and long-term teacher assignments, as well as our classroom instructional support rates, which includes our IAs, PHTAs, and PHAs. In closing, the $4.9 million required to fund this rate increase would come from our existing substitute budget. We will be monitoring our budget impact closely and revisit this at mid-year or 3rd quarter as needed. And that is the end of this section. I don't know if we're pausing for questions at this point.
Yes, thank you, Mr. McDonald. We will be pausing at this point so we can take some questions. And I see our first question is from Ms. Marin.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for this. I support it, and I think there's some good solutions in addition to the pay. I like that we're going to pay teachers if they are subbing during their planning time. I think that's a nice response to concerns we've heard. One question is, what about substitute principals? Because I know in my region, in Region 1, in the Madison Pyramid in particular, we've had a fantastic substitute principal who is an ongoing substitute, a long term. So how do these pay bands impact principals?
So the proposal today is focused on our teacher and classroom and support folks. We do have a separate set of pay bands that are in place for our principal substitutes, and we do have a strong cadre of individuals that after retirement do come back and help and support in that way. There is a designated rate for elementary, middle, and high. So based upon the level, there is an hourly rate that we do have in place. So today we're not bringing forward a recommendation for an adjustment to those rates.
And you said we do have a good pool of substitute principals? Yes, okay, so it's not as dire as with our classroom staff. Okay, I'd like to get clarity on what the action is here. Are we going to be acting upon this? I know nothing is on the agenda for Thursday, so does the board need to actively approve this? And if so, I'm happy to make a motion on Thursday.
We will be having this session today and deciding at the end of the session what the appropriate next steps are. And so we'll put you in queue. Thank you.
And so if this were to go through, though, it does require the board approval, correct?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Omesh.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for being responsive in including some of our IA and other subs in the broader package here. I did have a question, just looking at some of the numbers across counties, comparing to the market, whether we're concerned at all just about maybe the proportional difference across the various employee categories. Just looking at slide 6, I guess even looking at the long-term rate seems to be markedly, percentage-wise at least, above some of the other ones. I don't know if that maybe leaves us long-term in a precarious situation, but wondering what thought was given to that.
So I do want to just reiterate the fact that the recommendation for the $2 rate increase is for the balance of this current school year. Ultimately, I would imagine that we'll be monitoring our data closely and engaging in future conversations around what this means for the long term. But we do have this rather immediate need that we're hopeful that this adjustment at least will address for this current year.
Ms. Omesh, the other thing is the green represents the Fairfax retiree, which is, as you see, market leading across all divisions. And this reflected our philosophy that we want the very, very best high quality subs. And we know those are our retired teachers who've got years of experience. We've targeted even before the pandemic to get those folks to come back, and we're trying to maintain that. We also didn't want to, when we did this $2 across the board, leave out one group specifically not to be included and actually end up hurting our efforts to continue to have those retired teachers come in.
No, that's very helpful, thank you. So then I guess looking at and I appreciate the clarification about this year as well. Looking at maybe the non-retirees, is our intention more so retention here or recruitment? Just looking at it, and I'm not saying that, we all have a solution right now, but I remain a little concerned about that.
I think, and I'll let Mr. McDonald add, I think we want to do two things. We have a pool of subs. We want to activate all of them to come in the pool, right? They're taking a dip in the pool, some of them only once a week or once a month. We want them in often. So we hope that the increase in the wage will do that. As you saw, another consideration we're looking at is incentivizing, actually making a trigger 20 days. If you come and join us for 20 days, which is almost really 3 weeks of work, there might even be a different band that's not before you today. So we want some in the pool to get more active, and then we do want to try to get others on the sidelines in the market. It is low unemployment, but to say, hey, for this amount of money, we'll do it. And as some of you all have said before, board members, some of our rates currently are now equal to fast food establishments who've raised their rates, and we've got to value our kids if we want to get labor pool folks to come and join and support our kids during the time that we're in.
Right, no, I mean, like you suggested, for those who are considering whether this is an option or not, I think we still are in a tough spot. I don't know that we're doing completely the recruitment, that recruitment is necessarily going to be achieved through this, right? But multiple steps, which I know you mentioned, the PR campaign and whatnot, but continuing to think about even long-term, how this is leaving us a little bit behind other divisions, moving forward.
One other thing I would say, one, we're not saying this is the end of the conversation even for this year if we look at data and think further changes need to be made. And second, even long-term, when I propose a budget in January, we'll have another 2 to 3 months of data to really inform whether we need to say this is more than a one-year market shock and whether we need to do something more permanently, and we are having our team start to review that now.
Great. No, I look forward to hearing a little bit more about where we go with that, because the solution may not even just be money. We can think in multiple dimensions, and I know you are considering that. My last question is just about slide 4. And did you guys get the chance to maybe do analysis or have some thinking around the dip and how it's differentiated us across divisions? I know 60 to 90 is pretty significant. If you can provide some insights just so that we can begin to put our finger on where that problem is and identify the adequate solutions to address it.
Sure. So anecdotally, I think I shared at a previous work session that the Region 4 HR directors are in very close communication, and so we do communicate on a regular basis. The need for our substitutes and the fill rates is on everyone's mind and is subject to some of the frequent questions that are asked by other divisions. What I can say is that there's not a division within Region 4 that has not reported a marked decrease in their fill rates at this point in time. Some are experiencing a more acute shortage than compared with others, but all are facing a decline in their fill rates. Some of our neighboring districts have fill rates closer to 80%, while others are in the upper 50% range. So it does span a wide range in terms of looking at our neighbors. I will say that everyone is looking for creative solutions. Many divisions are looking at pay as one of those ways to attract folks from the market into the classroom. But to Ms. Amish, to your point, we do need to look at some non-cost ways that we can continue to work with the pool to activate and motivate them to work.
Yeah, I mean, even, college students who might have a day where they're not doing classes or, something like that, this might be appealing to use that Mason partnership or something to think of additional ways. And I know you're considering it. And then in terms of trends, we can look at, everyone is dipped, but then where are we relative to, the average, or where are we falling short more than maybe is expected with the pandemic? I think that might be worth some analysis and thinking about, of course. And I did realize I actually do have one other question that I had written down. Where does this leave us now that we've offered certain pay to monitors that's significantly above these pieces? I am a little concerned at how we're going to even that out.
So our monitor pay is $15.73 per hour. And so when we layer that, and I'll go to this slide here, we layer that here within the context of what our proposed rates are. All except for our PHA rates will now be above the monitor pay. So with that $2 an hour increase, all those other groups will be falling above what monitors are making per hour. And I'll add to that just to provide some context, because I think this is an important piece, because I think perhaps what's on your mind and the mind of community members and other board members is, did we pull from the sub pool to fill those monitor positions? And so my team has been working to identify where those connections are. Thus far, we've hired 253 monitors to support our schools in a variety of ways for this year. But only 30 of those individuals have come directly from our sub pool. So it's not a substantial impact. Any impact is an impact. But I think a large portion of the folks that have reactivated as monitors were the folks that served last year. And so schools were able to make those strong connections and pull them back into our classrooms and into our schools.
And I'd also like to add that having started out 31 years ago as an IA and a substitute teacher, I know that many of our substitute teachers really enjoy the variety of substituting and working in different buildings, interacting with different students in different communities. So while we don't have any data on that, I do know that many of the substitutes who worked in my buildings when I was a principal would take different jobs just because of that variety. So that it is a bit different than working in the same building as a monitor versus experiencing the breadth of Fairfax County schools.
No, I definitely think that's fair, and the flexibility. It's a different kind of role, but just kind of even outwardly, when people are, which role they're going to be attracted to, I just want to make sure we're considering. I mean, I guess what's our internal explanation, even for the PHAs and PHTAs, as to why we're comfortable with that?
So I think with the current structure of our pay rates, we're looking at the scope or the demands of the work that each of those individuals are responsible for when taking on the roles. So with our monitors really can be in charge of student supervision and safety. While our PHA subs may also be put in that position, it's likely with a one-on-one connection with a student and not a full classroom of students. And so we do make that differentiation across our scales. And the differentiation at the long-term sub level versus the short-term rate really is around the level of planning that needs to go in. So our long-term subs do lesson plans, they meet with parents, they do grade student work and whatnot, because they're filling in on that long-term basis for the teacher who's absent. So again, along that full continuum of pay grades, there's differentiated work responsibilities which lead us to the differentiated pay rates.
My time, yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Omesh. Dr. Anderson?
Thank you. Number of questions here, so I'm just going to jump in. Mr. McDonald, can you speak to the differences in the sub areas? Do we see better fill rates in some areas than we do others? Are there critical areas that you can speak to? My second question, you talked about that the 4.9 would be coming from the existing sub budget. Where does that currently stand? And if that were to be depleted, what would be the plans to provide some additional resources there? Thirdly, I do want to echo what Ms. Omesh had said. College students are a wonderful avenue for subbing, especially for the days that they don't have schools. So I would really want to hear what efforts we could increase in that area with Nova and with Mason, because they're close by and it's easy for some of those institutions, for those students to come and sub into our buildings. My fourth question is regarding the hourly rate for teachers. I know that's a consideration, so if you don't have an answer for me today, that's fine. But I would like to have some more details in terms of how would that work for elementary students? Because I worked in a division where I did at the secondary level, I was able as a principal to pay teachers to cover classes during their planning. But I am not sure how that would work for elementary, and I am not sure how that would work when other staff who don't typically have students are utilized to cover classes when it's an all hands on deck situation, such as counselors, because we've had opportunity where they've had to be in front of kids for the entire day. So I would like to have that information.
All right, thank you, Dr. Anderson. I'm hopeful that I got all of your questions down, and if I do miss out on something, please do remind me. So in terms of, I think the first question related to overall fill rates and impacts across the division. So we are seeing our experience to date when we look across all of our days that we've been in attendance through September 24th, which is when we pulled the data. Our total fill rate for the division is 71.4%. We do have our teachers sitting at about 75% fill rate, and our IA fill rate sitting at 61%. So there is a great need for our instructional assistant, PHTA, PHA groups. In terms of the impact across the division from a geographic standpoint, we are seeing needs across all 5 regions. Our Title I schools, even our schools that don't have the economic impact are all experiencing gaps in coverage. So it's not focused on a specific region or a specific school. In terms of the outreach to college students, we have partnerships with Nova and GMU. We're working very closely with them. We're tapping into our student teacher resources through George Mason. There's a teacher club at Mason that we recently became aware of, and so we're working to get some time to interact with those students, to have a small session with them and educate them on this opportunity and hopefully bring them into the fold. We have sent people out to Nova and GMU. We've done orientations, information sessions, try to get folks background checked there. So we are absolutely actively engaged in accessing those resources. In terms of the draft proposal or the future consideration proposal related to planning and compensating teachers for covering during that period of time, we're still working through those operational details. And you're absolutely correct. It's a little bit easier to imagine and understand the experience at the middle and high school level. We're still parsing through how that looks at the elementary school level and in what units we're able to compensate and perhaps make a recommendation on that. In terms of the overall impact to the budget, our fill rates are low, and so we're perhaps not making as much progress in chewing through the existing budget. But as I said, we are going to closely monitor that, and we may perhaps be back at mid-year or third quarter if we're seeing that the overall experience with that particular budget is running higher than anticipated, and perhaps will need some additional dialogue with the board at that time.
And we've lost Dr. Anderson. I think what we can do is put a minute and 10 in reserve for her if she comes back. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. We could go to slide 5. I think like everything else, the pandemic has really exacerbated longstanding problems. It's not as if we didn't have a sub shortage before COVID. One thing that I'll be asking in the next steps is for a 5-year look back on sub fill rates. I'm sure that information is available. In fact, I think I've seen pieces of it in the past to help bring context to the need to make these investments not just a 1-year commitment. This is something that many of us were interested in tackling before COVID, and it's not going to be the problem is not going to go away when COVID goes away. Slide 7. What timeline do you envision for adding an additional pay band for the 20-day plus subs and the extra pay for teachers who cover classes during their planning time?
So, Mr. Frisch, we're actively working to cost that out and working on those operational details. I think within the next week or two, we'll have finalized that information, and then I think it's a matter of just slating it through the conversation with the board chair and perhaps the budget chair and getting that scheduled for additional dialogue.
Yeah, I would just simply add, if we were going to do it, a good marking time would be the end of first quarter and the beginning of second quarter, which would be early November, to say it's second quarter, we're going to have a new process, which is about another month time, and some board meetings between now and then.
All right. I will stress that the sooner the better. We don't want people burning out, and we already know that this is a tremendous strain on people. So can we go to slide 6? So we know that a third of our staff live in other counties surrounding Fairfax. Do we know where our subs live, particularly by their category, retiree, non-retiree, short-term, long-term?
I don't have that data today. I know that we do have data when we zoom out to all FCPS employees, but that more narrow look in terms of our sub pool, I don't have that today.
I ask because while it's interesting to see how we improve our ranking relative to other jurisdictions with these increases, which I support, it would be helpful to know whether we are becoming more competitive, in the areas where these subs actually live. So, for example, if you're a non-retiree and you're in Prince William or Arlington, perhaps it's perhaps our standing there is not enough to get you to come back and continue subbing here, and it's more enticing to sub where you live. So I think that's something that we might want to take into consideration if we can get that information.
Actually, I have a zip code run by category, but it's from last July 2020. And at that time, based on zip codes reported, 79.2% of our substitutes lived in Fairfax County, and 20.8% did not live in Fairfax County.
So about 10% more in the county than our staff overall. That's good information to
Yes.
have. I'd be interested to have it, that information so that we can break it down by surrounding counties. So I'll ask for that in the next step. I appreciate that. And then continuing Dr. Anderson's train of thought, have we looked at disparities in sub-fill rates by pyramid? It would be helpful to know if certain pyramids are having more severe shortages, and perhaps we need additional funds or incentives to help these schools. Any comments on that?
So we do have the data. Right now, we're working with schools who have, been reporting critical needs directly to us. We're certainly monitoring the data, and that's not one of the recommendations or future recommendations on our list, but certainly an interesting and perhaps productive lead to track down in terms of a strategy.
And I'm sure we'll know more about those needs and how they're impacted by this temporary increase in pay.
So Mr. Frisch, shall I put you on a go back?
Sure, I didn't hear any buzzer, sorry.
That's okay. I'll put you on a go back. And now we will go to Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and then we'll go to Ms. Pekarsky.
I'm not choosing. Yeah, thank you guys for this presentation. I wanted to look a little bit more specifically. I noticed on page 8, the changes for we have significant changes for everyone, but the retirees as compared to the Fairfax non-retirees is quite a difference. Do we have any information with respect to whether we're getting responses from retirees? Where do we need this outreach to be? Because I see when you look at the Fairfax non-retirees, they're currently at 1479, whereas our non-retirees are at 1479. Our retirees are at 2091, which is really the top of the market for the region. They're already above the region, but our non-retirees are not. So do our numbers show that that's where the need is? That those are the people that aren't responding? Do we have any data on that?
I do, actually. So the need is universal. Ultimately, we have about 30% of our subpool that's actively engaged in work up to this point this year. So we have approximately 5,000 folks in the pool. Of those 5,000, 4,700 are teacher subs and about 400 are IA subs. When we go to the teacher aspect of it, when we drill down, about 200 of those individuals who have picked up this work are our FCPS retirees. So
can I just get you to break down I'm sorry, I may not have made the connection when you said it. Of our total available retirees, what percentage are generally responding?
So 200 out of about 700 so have responded. So that math
That's
and
okay.
doing that at the
No. I missed it. It wasn't that. It may have been that you didn't say it. It just didn't land. So
Sure.
forgive me. But with respect to the non-retirees, do you have similar numbers?
I do. So we do have about 4,000 non-retirees in the pool, and we've had 14. We've had about 2,000, or I'm sorry, about 1,200 of them pick up work.
Okay.
So 1,200 out of 4,000.
Well, the reason I'm asking is because there's a couple of things you said earlier. You said that there are other people in our region that have better responses, and then we have this disparity between the pay between retiree versus non-retiree. So I'm wondering whether we need to dig deeper to find out why people are telling us no. I mean, is it about money? Is it about something else? Is it a culture issue? Have we looked into that?
So what I would say to you is we've had some conversations with folks. We haven't had a focus group, and perhaps that's the next step here. But we have had conversations with folks in our pool that are actively working and who have chosen to sit out. And there are a wide variety of reasons why folks are electing to sit out. Some have to do with childcare needs. They're outside of the school setting. I know childcare centers are really struggling to find help. And so parents that may have non-school age children aren't able to contribute in the way that they'd like. Some of our subs have their own either personal medical conditions that are influencing decisions about, stepping into a classroom during the course of the pandemic. So there's that general safety need that exists, and so some folks are making decisions to wait until vaccines are more widely available for school-age children, and then they might, at that point, be more comfortable stepping back into the classroom. So, a wide variety of needs. This pandemic has had a very different impact on each and every individual, and so folks are reconsidering their options. I will share, I was listening to a news report about the fact that folks are sitting flush with more full bank accounts now after the pandemic, as it relates to all the stimulus initiatives that have happened. And so folks who may have picked up part-time work or temporary work in the past also are sitting out of the workforce at this point in time. So it could be a wide variety of reasons, but we are hearing from folks around each of those different reasons.
Well, I guess my concern is that if we are getting different results than our neighbors, then there's a reason, and it may or may not be money. I also have concerns when I look at our Fairfax non-retirees, whereas certainly we want our retirees to come in, but when I look at our non-retirees, there is a big difference between where they are in comparison to the other market. And so I'm wondering if perhaps we need to look at how we bring them more in line. If health is a concern, possible exposure, our non-retirees may be less concerned. So I feel like I need a little bit more information as to, what is really going on. And I'd also like to see how we might be able to address our non-retirees in terms of bringing them more in line with the market, because our retirees are already above the market. Not to say that that they don't need it, but it seems to me the non-retirees have a bigger concern here that we haven't addressed. So those would be, I'll stop. That's where my focus would be right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Mr. McDonald, do you want to respond at all?
I guess my response would link back to something I stated just a minute or two ago about, perhaps engaging some folks in additional focus groups. I know we did some of that work last year, but our operating status looks different this year compared with last year. So, we can dig a little bit deeper and get some of those answers from folks from a variety of different groups as it relates to their engagement. Again, as Dr. Brabrand said earlier, with our retiree subs, they bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the role, and certainly do have an impact that is pretty great on our students in a very positive way.
Not objecting to that at all. I just think if it's about health, then you may have less of a concern about health in a different age group.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Ms. Pekarsky?
Yeah, thank you. I don't know that I have any novel ideas, because I think my colleagues have kind of hit some of the main points. But so I will just say, I would love to get disaggregated data at some point to see where these needs, where do we have critical needs in certain areas? Because I think subbing in different programs Not every sub-location is the same. So if we've ever given any thought, and I know you said you haven't gone down that route, but of, pay looking differently depending, where the sub is actually filling in. I'm very interested in that because I think that can be an effective, way to address some of these. Maybe not for this year because I know this is an impending need, but maybe going forward. I'll go back to the retiree versus non-retiree. I do wonder if there aren't health reasons why these are not being filled. And I think what we're all looking for is reliable people who are coming in. We keep getting them in, so I like this idea of bumping up. I don't know that I necessarily agree that 20 days a year is enough, maybe a monthly allocation, but that's another point to consider. But our non-retirees, I think, will probably tend to be people who are looking for an income, who are really going to be dependent on this as an income. So I think it stands to reason that we would want to be on the higher end of the market in order to attract these people and get them coming back. I share the concern with the retirees, and I understand these are very experienced educators and they are who we want, but I just have to wonder at that point in somebody's career or work career if the reason they are not filling seats is because of money. If we do the focus groups or what we're going to do to have some of that analysis, I think it would be helpful to all of us. So I think that's my biggest points. Thank you.
What I could add, Ms. Pekarsky, is that as we're looking at the possibility of focus groups, we also have the ability to see what our experience is through the end of the year. And if we were going to come back to the board and make a recommendation to make this a permanent adjustment, we would be able to provide some of that information for you. And that would also give us information as to whether or not our retirees were taking advantage of the additional pay that would be provided. The other thing that I want to share with the board is, and you're all very well aware, is that we've had some concerns from different employee groups this year about value and how we as a system value individuals. And so as we look at the possibility of making changes to a pay scale and perhaps not making changes for everyone on that pay scale, it could raise the question of value. And so I only bring that, again, you all received many more of the emails than we received, but I do want to highlight that as we think about this scale, not only looking at wanting to ensure that we have the best teachers in front of students, but to also ensure that all of our employees who are on a particular scale realize that they're valued.
I can appreciate that. I mean, I think I go back to the value is in the fact that we are paying our retirees well above, what others are. But point well taken. One thing I did actually want to bring up, I know in the past we've just had this idea about a floating sub in schools, just a permanent person. Have you talked about that, thought about that? Would this be the year to implement something? Oh my, Oliver, sorry. Okay, I'll stop.
Do you want to just respond to the floating sub idea so that we can?
Sure. I mean, it's something that it's come up as part of the conversation, and certainly is something that we've been looking at. Ultimately, taking that step does come with additional costs around benefits and whatnot, and so I think we continue to engage and consider.
The thing is, our numbers are so low, it's not going to be the game changer that we might think. It's one more person. On a Friday right now, we're down 5 or 10 people, that one permanent sub. It's one person, but it's then balancing, if we were going to do that, it would need to be a package with all these other additional strategies for consideration. So I think it could be a future strategy for consideration as we move forward. I do want to ask one other thing, Sean. I know Ms. Omesh scooted out, but somebody else asked too about college being a great group. Haven't we made changes, or are we looking at making changes to cut the minimum criteria for the number of college courses required to be a sub from 60 days, I believe, down to 30 days? Can you confirm whether my recollection of that's correct or not?
You mean credits?
Yes.
What did I say?
Days, yes. So
Oh, yeah, more than days, I'm sorry, course credits.
we did. So we did make that change. And we also carved out some other additional exceptions for folks to join the pool. Amongst those exceptions are Fairfax County students who are part of our Teachers for Tomorrow program that completed that program. The college credit requirement is waived because they've had that experience as a high schooler and working in a classroom. And we've also waived the minimum requirement for individuals that are enrolled in teacher prep programs. So we are trying to provide avenues for folks that have experience working in classroom settings and are engaged in that work to have a quicker path to help support in this way.
And I just
Thank
want
you.
to reiterate what Dr. Braybrand shared about the individual sub in the building. Going back to our Project Excel days 21 years ago and being an administrator in a school building with a permanent sub, there were issues. You know, some days you could deploy this individual and provide additional support across the school system. And then when you had multiple teachers out, it was very difficult to try to figure out where this person was going to land. We also had issues where a teacher would sign up and get this sub in the classroom without going through the full process. It can be successful, but
So, Mr. Smith, since it's not on today's agenda, and given that we are short on time, how about if we table that conversation about those subs until another date?
certainly, I was just
I appreciate
clarifying
it.
once
It's just,
again.
we've got quite a bit to manage today. Thank you. Ms. Cohen?
Thank you so much. I appreciate kind of picking up on that. One just piece for future consideration. Are we, for the students that we're bringing in from Nova and George Mason, are we doing anything to try to incentivize them like we do for Teachers for Tomorrow, where we offer them potential contracts for FCPS? I know we have a teacher shortage too. So is this any way a mechanism towards trying to build that bridge as well?
So we haven't implemented that particular strategy, and I do like that strategy and something I can take back to the team. But we do provide an incentive for folks that do engage in student teaching with the division, and many of those students do that in getting earlier interviews and connections with our schools in the hiring process.
Awesome, thank you. You know, I think one thing, you know, Dr. Braybrand said like 5 or 10 folks down, but I'll tell you, I just happened to be in the building on Friday at a local high school, and they were down 30 teachers on a Friday. So I just, even at a building level, it's impossible. You don't even have enough, you know, IAs and admins and anybody. So when we talk about teacher planning time and we talk about, you know, teachers, just, we continue to add more. There's no time for any of that because they're having to cover these. So I do really appreciate this approach of, like, again, it's kind of the conversation we had about bus drivers last week, that we're just going to have to triage some positions because the ripple effect of what happens when we don't have subs in a building is seriously impeding our teachers' ability to do the work that they are supposed to do and that they want to do. I guess one question I have, this is a conversation Dr. Braybrand, you and I had about maintenance folks on Friday, but have we also looked at, I know we always compare school system to school system, but are we also looking at kind of commercial rates? Because my fear is that we see a lot of entry-level jobs that are hiring for well above $15 an hour locally.
Yeah, I made reference to that a little bit at the very beginning, saying even the restaurant industry, we're seeing them raise, and do we value working with kids more than working with, food? Not that working with food isn't important too, but in our school mission. So yes,
Right,
we
no,
have, that's reflected in some of these changes that we've made. I don't know, though, that there's a private sector comparison for subs the same way there would be, though, for maintenance. So I don't know, I'd
I
have to
guess,
defer to Sean on
yeah,
that.
that was the question I was going to ask. Things like Kitty Country and private schools that we see around.
Oh, I see,
Are
I
we
see.
mar-
I see
Are
what
we
you're saying.
market competitive there?
I don't know, Mr. McDonald, do we have data around the private childcare rates for substitutes?
I don't have that in front of me. Certainly, when we do the rate setting, we do market comparisons. I believe our benchmarking for substitutes has traditionally been focused around other local school divisions and setting that benchmark. I'm not certain that we have been reaching out to do that comparison with childcare centers.
Okay. Just a thought as we see folks kind of figuring out where they're going. Are we competing with the schools in our own neighborhoods? Another question I had about our kind of long range idea of increasing by the number of days. I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I do want to make sure that it doesn't wind up disincentivizing the folks who may only be available 4 days a month. I think of like a local screening sub who has a designated day that they come in, and that may be their only day because they're doing other things. So I just want to make sure we're not disincentivizing those folks. And then the last thing is a handover from pre-pandemic times. We've had a conversation about a long-term IA pay band. And I just was hoping that we could have some thoughts about if that would be helpful since we're down IAs more than anything else.
So that's not a proposal we have today. Ultimately, the differentiation on the teacher side between the daily rate and the long-term sub rate focuses on the fact that our long-term subs for teachers are required to do planning and grading and some of those other tasks. So I do understand that there are longer-term needs for classroom instructional support folks, but the pay differentiation really is based upon the fact that the level of the work adjusts when you step from that short-term to the long-term assignment on the teacher side.
Cohen, that is your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I do have some information about the pay, not necessarily for subs, but in looking at some Virginia data, the median wage for childcare workers is about $10.96. Our median wage for preschool teachers is about $15.91, and our center directors, the median wage in Virginia is about $27.62. So it gives a bit of perspective as you think about those individuals who might be coming into sub versus those who are in the job full time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That is very helpful. And at some point, we probably should have all of these numbers put in one place. Okay, I now have Ms. Derenak-Kofax, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you, and thank you all for bringing this to us today. I will start on page 8. I do appreciate the update where we are looking at some of the information I shared at the board table last week about the PHTAs and the PHAs, and so they are in this new substitute pay recommendation. As I have, some high need schools in my area, and they were talking about the need for them, so I appreciate that being added here. In talking to the principals and getting the texts and emails I have from teachers recently, I have large amounts of anecdotal data, as do many of my colleagues, so this is nothing new to you. I am hearing there are no bodies to be found, so that is a scary comment to hear. And because of that, I am willing to support this as an option, but I think we need critical analysis. I do appreciate what all of my colleagues are being saying about the concerns, and I'm hearing both sides. I'm hearing from you, Mr. Smith, and you, Mr. McDonald, about the need to compensate our
long-term retirees at a wage that they are willing to, but I think the number, when I did the math, it was only 28% of them are applying now. So will this change their willingness to come through? If it is a health consideration, probably not, but time will tell. And I think, I am concerned, though, it is a bit difficult to wind back the clock. We've done it before, and it is a lot of harm done. So I think we have to think very carefully. I just want to talk to my colleagues before Thursday about that particular pay band. The other two questions I have then, and ones that I'm hearing from my anecdotal data, is how are we going to be able, is there any way we're going to be able to assist our schools with those hard to fill positions, either for high level courses or specific courses? Again, hearing from teachers going, a specialized teacher that they're feeling like they need to come in with a temperature because no one can fill their classes. I mean, we are at that point in time, and I know you know that, but I think this is, I appreciate what we're trying to do, but I want to stop there because I want to see if you have any ideas on that one.
So I think part of it is related to really, again, recruiting folks that maybe retired from other fields and have some expertise in a particular content area. I know a couple years back we did a large event during the government shutdown and generated a lot of interest from folks that were furloughed rather. And some of those folks stuck with us and had some really critical skills that really lent themselves to the idea that you're speaking to right now. You know, additionally, I'll go back to our retirees. We're really relying upon them for some of those more critical areas. I know I had a conversation with a principal just the other day about a need for a Latin teacher. And she was able to secure a retired Latin teacher to help step in during a period of time where a teacher had to be out for a couple of weeks, and it filled that critical need. Latin's not one of those things you learn by reading ahead, and so, you know, it's critical that we have folks like that in the pool and we can activate them.
Right, I think that's very important, and that's particularly true for your higher level IB and AP courses. That's where I'm hearing that the fill rates are difficult to find. And I do think it's important that you share with us as part of the next steps the critical needs within schools. Again, because I'm doing reach outs, I'm hearing a lot. I'm assuming my area may be one, but it may not. But I think it's important for us to understand where and why. All right, that's it. My time's up.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak-Kofax. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
So I don't have a ton more to add because I think my colleagues have done a really good job of covering it. Ms. Derenak-Kofax touched on something I wanted to sort of touch upon, so I'm going to build on what she just said around, do we have data on certain days of the week, times of the year? I'm thinking like Friday before a long weekend, certain classes that have harder to fill or higher needs, such as some of these high-level classes or special education classes. And have we looked at differentiated pay to sort of incentivize people to sub on those days?
So I do have, I have data for this year as it relates to days of the week. And ultimately, when I look across the board, our experience or need on Mondays and Fridays are higher than the rest of the days of the week. And I think that's somewhat evident from the bar chart here in terms of the higher bars. Ultimately, that has been our experience in the past. That's not new or unique to the pandemic. When we look back at the data we've collected and been examining since, as far as I can remember, 2013, we have had that distinct need. Additionally, on our past experience has shown that days before a holiday, not always, but sometimes can be a higher experience day. There's some anomalies when we look at that, but for the most part, we do see that. But we also have those random sunny March days on a Friday during the basketball tournament that are high use days too. And so, it ebbs and flows, especially payday Fridays on a sunny day in March. Those are really tough days. So I say that to say that it depends. And But we do see that Monday, Friday usage still at a higher rate. And I would attribute, perhaps some of that to some of the pandemic-related stressors folks are experiencing and perhaps using those days as mental health days. When I look at the reasons for folks being out, more than 50% is related to sick leave on those Mondays and Fridays. So,
I guess the question I'd ask is, have we looked at sort of differentiated pay or bonus incentives or something for our sub-pools to be willing to work on some of these high needs days or these high needs classes areas? And this may not be for this year's pay raise that you're proposing for this year, but as some of you've talked about longer term. So that's one of my questions. Is that part of something you're studying as you come back to us for greater proposals?
I would say absolutely. It's something that we've discussed. One of the biggest challenges, quite honestly, related to a system like that is that we have data challenges around the tracking and the operationalizing of that. And so I do know that we're going to be looking at our contract for our sub-calling system. Perhaps that's an opportunity as part of when we build our RFP. To have a better understanding of what functionality a newer system may provide, to better operationalize that and perhaps move forward with a strategy such as that.
Thank you. And I'll just piggyback a little bit on what my colleagues have said and just put sort of to support what they've said in terms of our pay, our retiree pay, and points very well taken in terms of the value our retirees bring to us. And I completely agree that our retirees have a knowledge and skill set that's very needed. But there's just such a differentiation, I think, between the pay for a non-retiree and a retiree. I'm just wondering if something can be done to look at our non-retiree pay, because as you've been doing, I've been doing the research too, and the statement Ms. Kofax made that there's no bodies out there is as other industries are raising their salaries, they're still not finding bodies. And so that 1679 does concern me, because you know this better than I do, but in the HR world, right, do you pay per the position or per the person, right? And to some extent, our retirees bring a lot to these positions, so we want to pay for the person, but you also want to pay for the position. And that gap there is concerning me a little bit. So I just wanted to put that on the table. I don't know what to do about this year, but something to think about for next year. That was, I think, the extent of my questions that weren't covered by somebody else. I will reserve my 55 seconds or give it back to the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. I have Ms. Tolan, followed by 1 minute and 10 seconds for Dr. Anderson.
Yes, just quickly, I wanted to follow up on what a number of people have mentioned, looking at the non-retiree rates. Can you just explain maybe more fully why we just went with a $2 across the board versus looking at different amounts for these different groups to bring them more into line with the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach was to demonstrate the fact that each of the folks that are serving in this capacity bring value to the organization, and so we were valuing that contribution at the incremental, or not the incremental, but the same adjustment level, if that makes sense. So, that raising all boats, at that same level kind of approach.
All right. I guess I would say I understand that, and I certainly understand how important our retirees are. But if we're not even, if the $2 is not bringing our non-retirees up even, to the market rate with a number of other school districts, operationally, is it more difficult to look at, $3 for the non-retirees and $2 for the retirees, or, something like that?
No, operationally it's not. So, we have the fixed pay bands, and so folks are attributed to that particular pay band. So if we, down the road make adjustments that would give a differentiated amount to our short-term non-retirees versus our retirees, it's something that could be operationalized.
All right, thank you. I really like the idea of paying our teachers that are in the building. during their, planning periods. I've heard from a number of teachers that they would be more than willing to do that. And then you also have teachers that are experienced in the subject areas and can be really valuable. So I definitely support that. I definitely support the overall increase in the sub pay. I did want to point out, just looking at the chart that's up there right now, they're not our highest days. The Fridays are definitely the highest days, but we can see a bit of a peak on our Jewish holidays. So, it all fits together when we're looking at, I know you're tracking that for our future calendar discussions as well. So I just want to note that. I think I'm good.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. Dr. Anderson, and then I'm going to take a turn.
All right, thank you so much. I'm sorry to having to run out there. Mr. McDonald, can you tell us the percentages of our retirees versus non-retirees in our sub pool?
Sure. So 28% of our sub pool is made up of retirees.
Okay, thank you. And I know that that's an attractive bunch because we know that they're licensed and they have a lot of skill that they're bringing to the position only because they were in these positions. But I do want to echo what I think I heard my colleagues talked about. It just seems to be when we're looking at the chart on page 6, where our non-retirees fall on the scale versus our retirees, that gap just seems to be very, very wide. And I do want to lend support to what Ms. Tolan has said. If there's some space for us to increase that piece for our non-retirees, maybe it is not $2 across the board, maybe it is something else, just to bring us a little bit higher on the list, I think I would be in high support of that. And I do share some of the concerns that were raised regarding the retiree pay. One of the things I also want to point out, for working in the school for this long, it's not just about the pay, it's also about the benefits. How much would it cost for us to have a more robust, and again, you don't have to have this answer today, but a more robust package offered for our substitutes with the advanced degrees, with some of the criteria that we would be looking for, so that they would be more permanent employees rather than hourly employees in this way. I wonder if you've had an opportunity to have any of those discussions or to cost that out in any way.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Anderson. And before I answer that specific question, I do want to correct myself. It's 15% of our sub pool is made up of retirees. I apologize, I misspoke. In terms of looking at more robust compensation and possibly, bringing folks on in a different capacity to cover the sub needs, it's an ongoing conversation. I don't have any data or numbers to provide in terms of what the actual cost for benefits would be as it relates to bringing those folks on full time.
Thank you. Maybe perhaps that's something you could provide to us and you come back next time. Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. So I will take my time, and I'm actually very pleased to be able to follow Dr. Anderson because I do have significant concerns about the disproportionate impact of how we're addressing these pay comparisons. The retirees for long-term in particular, you're talking about $2.55 more than the next closest area. For the retirees for short-term, it's $3.33, and that's only above Montgomery County's degreed approach. So when we only have 15% of our pool coming from our retirees, maybe we should be looking at that disaggregation of somebody who has a degree versus not having a degree. I fully support everything up until that $2 increase, and I will suggest that we have a disaggregated motion put forward so that we separate out the treatment of the separate pay band for the retirees, unless there is a willingness within the board to really reconsider it and look at a smaller showing value payment for our retirees, but putting more money into the pockets of people who are not our retirees and who make up 85% of the pool, because the difference between a $16.79 an hour versus $22.91, you're talking over $5. And when we talk about valuing employees, that's something that we should be looking at. I do very much appreciate the $35 an hour payment for people to give up their planning time and spend it with students. I think that's an excellent idea, and I would actually suggest that we need to move that forward and actually also give that same rate to those teachers who are working with our students who are on quarantine. And with that, I'd just like some feedback before I continue on.
Let me share one thing. If the board, because several mentioned retirees, they're already the highest in the market. The board can decide to do the $2 for everything except the retirees and say, because they're the market leader, that they won't make any changes at this time if that's what the board decides. We could take the money from the retirees and add that into the non-retiree rate if the board decides. There is some history, as you just know, and I'm just telling you where the system is that before COVID, before even this board convened, there was a discussion about retiree subpay. The board heard loudly and clearly from that retiree committee then. That's why we were more circumspect in making a differentiation. So that's the reason we offered what we had. The board's feedback right now seems to be, if there is a consensus, to leave that alone and redirect some of that money into the non-retiree rate. We can do that before you vote on Thursday.
Dr. Brabrand, let me make it clear. It wasn't to do nothing with the retirees, but to be a more modest adjustment. Sure. So that we...
yeah, I wasn't just taking your comments. I was listening to everyone around the retiree. We could lower the amount and still have an increase, but less than the $2 across the board, and redirect some of it to a different rate if that's what the board wants to do.
And what about the possibility of implementing the $35 for planning time and also extending it to our teachers who are assisting students on quarantine?
So we're still working on the budget aspect of what the cost will be for that moving that forward. And so again, we would expect within the next week or two that we'll be able to provide an update around what that initiative would cost.
And then in addition to the budget, it's also looking at how we provide for our elementary teachers.
Excellent, thank you very much. I do get very concerned about the language that says for this year only. We know that if we make these changes, these are changes that will be implemented in our operation budget going forward. We cannot just presume that every change going up that we would actually bring it down. And so I would just encourage us to be prudent as we make those decisions. The last thing that I will offer is that what I'd like to do is get a will of the board. We do have another section of this presentation, and we're scheduled to go to 6 o'clock for the total budget discussion. But we have on deck, Mr. Frisch has shown an indication that he would like to speak again. I don't know if Dr. Anderson wants to, now that we've already given her the return to her minute and 10. I have Ms. Marin, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Derenak-Kofax, and Ms. Keys-Gamarra on deck. Ms. Keys-Gamarra took hers down. So can I get a will of the board? Do we want to continue with this conversation until 5, but realize that we are going to be very tight for the budget priorities discussion? Okay, then let's continue because we'll go ahead and Ms. Marin followed by, we can do that, just till 5. Ms. Marin followed by Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
Thank you. I do just want to offer some input this week, and I had 2 constituents who were excited to become subs. One works full-time, is a professional in the 30-ish age range. Another is a woman who has worked in the home and now finds herself in an empty nest, and she is jumping in. So I think it's really hard to know who our target audience is, what propelled them to do this at this time. I also think that I feel like we're having this discussion once again in a vacuum. There's so many things that impact this, and, there's the recruitment aspect, which I would like to, and trust our staff to give us their best proposal. And, I like the idea of perhaps adjusting some of the pay if that's going to entice more people to come, knowing what the retiree to non-retiree, education retiree that is, right? Because as I just said, someone else, kind of in their retirement phase was interested. But the other thing is that there's the promoting the caring culture piece. And again, we come back to planning time. Our teachers are stressed, they're tired, they're run down at the end of the week. And just like I felt last school board meeting when we were talking about school bus driver pay, here we are now talking about one particular silo of pay. And I think that as the board, we need to do better to set up these more strategic conversations, which is why at the outset I said, I'm good with this, let's go. I feel like there's been some due diligence, there's drawbacks and pluses, but at the end of the day, we have to make a decision. So let's make the decision. We're in the situation we are now. This is one strategy. The staff says that this is a strategy, knowing what the marketing, what the pool of applicants is. But I think to keep talking about this particular thing and tweaking it, and it's not going to produce the results we want. We know that they're looking at salary scales. We know that we're looking for an assistant super for HR, despite Mr. McDonald's yeoman work in the last year and a half. There are these other big picture things we keep talking about, and yet we keep digging in the details on things like this. So I really would say, let's look strategically, let's make this change now as one strand, and let's really focus on that planning time.
Thank you. Ms. Derenak-Kofax.
I wanted to clarify one thing that I had said before. So while I talked about there was a lack of ability to find bodies, and then I kind of went off on the tangent for the higher education classes and things like that, our HL and AP advanced classes. There was also comments that I've heard from our elementary schools, and Dr. Brabrand, what you said, it was concerning to me, that even in elementary schools, they were finding applicants that were not qualified. That, and to digress the minimum qualifications more is difficult for me to hear. So I really would not be in favor of that portion. And then I guess, Ms. Tolan, you alluded to that, but I must have missed a part. I know I currently have in my district teachers, because they cannot find subs. Now I'm going to go back to the other end of the scale. Because they cannot find subs for those higher level courses, we have teachers that are teaching their regular classes and recording lessons. How can we compensate those people because they cannot find a sub for some of those higher level classes? So can we compensate them for their time? You understand?
Mr. McDonald, we are compensating for recording of classes for stream and check-in outside of contract hours. I know that's not what you're asking, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of that scenario. Do we have that scenario currently where teachers are having to record? Most of them are getting an extra period to teach, and that's an AT contract. Are we having other teachers record for just regular instruction right now, Mr. McDonald?
I'll be honest, Dr. Bramer, I'm not aware of that. And perhaps Ms. Derenak-Kofax, if we can find some time just so I can get up to speed on what that experience is, so that I can better track down what the need is and perhaps address it.
Okay, because I think that's important. So those two things I just wanted to point out, because I really, it's concerning when you have elementary schools saying they don't have qualified applicants.
Yeah. Two other things I might just say to quickly wrap up on this. There's more than one bite of the apple here. One, this is about trying to increase demand with the raising of pay. Feedback from you all about retirees or no retirees, or tweaking that a little bit. The second is we're going to continue to look at this issue of increasing supply. One, about letting the teachers cover a class. And then the third point I just want to make about the health. We can do some focus group work on that, about how can we make it more hospitable for subs. Some schools, subs like to work at, perhaps better than others, are their strategies. I do think another shoe will drop if the FDA approves the Pfizer vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds, and we'll need to bring you what the data looks like in November and December around our subfill rates if we see a shift of more people off the sidelines and into our elementary school. So I just want to bring that to you. That will be another factor not in play right now that may be in plate around the health issue that you all have mentioned.
Darren Kofax, you have a half a minute.
All right. For that half a minute, I will say, living through taking back the salary from the scaling it back, I am not certain where I stand on, I do believe they have the skill sets necessary, and I'm not certain that I am willing to, that I'm not willing to go with the $2 an hour across the board for them. So I continue to think about it and talk about it, because I know that was a difficult thing for us to go through because of not having enough money in the system. So I guess my question then is, where did we leave them and where are they now? Like, where did we leave them when we took away the compensation because we had to, because of budget cuts? We went from what per hour to what per hour? Do you remember that? For the Fairfax retiree.
How did we restore
Yes.
what was taken away is your question.
You're exercising my brain cells. This was a couple years ago. My recollection is that we brought the retirees, as well as all levels of subs, back close to, but not exactly to the rate that they were making prior to the reduction. So it was within a close range, but it wasn't an exact amount.
Well, I'm hearing conversation. So I would like to have that data before Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could provide a disaggregation between the short-term and long-term, and what the cost is, and whether you're a retiree and non-retiree. I think that's all data that this board needs to have. Excellent. I know we haven't come to a full decision on this. We've gone through everybody who had a comment or wanted to have a go back. I will suggest that it's 5 o'clock. We have 1 hour slated for the rest of our budget discussion.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. I did raise my hand. I did it not too long ago. You may have missed it.
Oh, it must have been after I had already written down my list. So Dr. Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you. There was something that Ms. Dana Kovacs said that just gave me pause. Did we talk about changing the standard for substitutes? I may have missed that part of the conversation, so I was hoping for some clarification.
So we did, Dr. Anderson, we did make some adjustments to the qualifications for substitutes. So we do currently ask folks to have a minimum of 30 credit hours completed at the college level. We do provide some additional exceptions. So for our FCPS students who complete our Teachers for Tomorrow program, which is an opportunity for them to be directly working with students in classrooms and having those guided experiences. Once they've achieved their high school diploma, they are eligible to serve as a teacher sub. The high school diploma being the minimum requirement in the Commonwealth of Virginia to hold or to fill the role of substitute. We also have provided some additional flexibility for folks that are enrolled in teacher prep programs who are pursuing a field of education, and so we have provided that flexibility as well.
Okay, thank you. I do want to say one thing. I thought I heard it earlier, but I am not sure. If we are going to review the non-retiree pay, I also want to be sure that we're balancing this out with some of our employees who are contracted employees, so that the hourly rate for our substitute doesn't supersede that of our regular employees. So I want to make sure that I say that. And lastly, I'm very excited about the compensation for teachers, but I'm not ready to make a decision on that until I have some more information. And I know that's not what you're asking, but I want to be sure that I put that on the table, because I'm not sure how we're going to treat counselors, reading specialists, again, elementary school folks. So I would like to have all of that in place before I make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. And as a result, now Ms. Keys-Gamar's got her hand up too. So we'll just quickly do that and then go to the next subject.
This will be really quick. I just received a note asking about, and you can verify whether this is accurate, Mr. McDonald. It says, have we looked at the system where subs have to work for a certain number of days in the classroom and within a certain amount of time, or they have to re-register? And is that a possible impediment for those people that might be on the fence anyway? It's sort of like it's just too much bother. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And yeah, that's my.
Sure. So, we did, prior to the pandemic, have a requirement that subs did need to work a minimum of 10 days per semester. We did provide flexibility during the course of the pandemic and waived that requirement to retain folks and ensure that they were still on our rosters. We have been looking at reinstating that, but I think what I'm hearing is that perhaps we need to push pause on that and continue to provide to maximize the flexibility. And I agree with you 100% in that regard, that we want to be able to ensure that we keep as many folks on our rosters to sub as possible.
Just a consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next section, we have not put this on new business yet. And so we do need to put it on new business for Thursday night. And then if we do new business and then vote on the 21st, does that give you time to implement?
So if we are looking at that time frame, then we would be looking at a November implementation date.
Okay, which is consistent with what Dr. Brabrand had suggested with the other pieces. Okay.
The point of order, please.
Yes, Ms. Marin.
Can't we add it to the agenda, though, with a 2/3 vote? I mean, if
The 2/3 vote, we could, we
Just
have
so
to
we-
put it on new business, and then we could do use parliamentary procedure 2/3 to vote to take it off and
rather than
action on
delay it. I
Thursday.
mean, if we're looking to advance this as quickly as possible, then
I'm not sure we have full consensus at this point, but yes, we could do it that way.
Okay.
Thank you. And with that, let's move on to the next section of the agenda. We will discuss the school board priorities for the fiscal year 23 budget. Vice Chair Elaine Tolan and I met with Finance and Budget and decided this year to go through a survey process to determine school board interests. Thank you for taking the time to complete the form. We had an extremely high participation rate. The survey asked you to share themes you thought the fiscal year 23 budget should be centered around, as well as requesting feedback about non-negotiable items and soliciting any ideas on how the budget process might be smoother. Ms. Burden will provide a short review of the fiscal year 23 budget development process and provide a reminder about the budget question process and identify themes indicated in the survey, as well as the current budget calendar or major events spanning November through February. At the end of the presentation, each school board member will have an opportunity, if desired, to speak to their priorities. The bulk of the work session should be school board discussion about priorities and interaction amongst school board members. Our goal today is to get some consensus on critical areas that the superintendent should take into account as he builds his fiscal year 23 budget priorities. Now I will turn it over to Ms. Burden. And I do want to thank Ms. Burden and Ms. Wigington for the incredible amount of work and effort they have put into, including over this past weekend as they pulled together everybody's input.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah, go to the next one.
Great, Ms. Burden, can we take down the pictures of everybody participating while you present the slides, and then we'll put them back up again? Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. Our objective today is to discuss the fiscal 23 school board budget priorities, reach consensus on those priorities if possible, and all with the idea that this will inform Dr. Brabrand while developing the fiscal 23 superintendent's proposed budget. I'm going to go over just a few slides before the discussion. Next slide. The FCPS budget development process is a collaborative process that typically involves many stakeholders. I know you know this, but it's worth repeating. The superintendent's code-required charge is to prepare a budget that reflects the needs of the school division or a needs-based budget. And we provided the code citation for your reference. As always, the budget planning process includes feedback garnered from the school board members on their priorities. The next topic is about submitting budget questions. This year, we have a new Google form link to make it easy and convenient to ask questions. Although honestly, I'm torn about that because I'm not really sure that I want to make it easier, but be that as it may, we have a new Google form link to make it easier. As always, you'll need to indicate priority 1, 2, and 3 on your budget questions. If you need a quick turnaround because it's for a vote, then that would be priority 1. If there's an upcoming decision but not urgently needed, that would be priority 2. And if it's just information you'd like to know, but it's not for a budget decision, then priority 3 would be appropriate. You must be signed into your FCPS Schools Net account to access the budget question form. And next slide will show you what the form looks like. Basically, your name, which is a drop-down menu. You indicate the priority, which is also a drop-down menu, and then type in your question. And just to be clear, this is just a repository for budget questions. We will still distribute the questions via email to school board members and LT members, and the development of a response and the approval routing will continue as it always has. And I will provide you a Google form link for budget questions tomorrow via email. This chart represents the current budget calendar of major events spanning November through February. The next thing up is the fiscal 23 fiscal forecast on November the 23rd. That's just a preliminary review of the budget forecast that is provided at a joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors. And you all will get a sneak peek at the school side at the work session, I think scheduled for November the 9th. And remember that this is a very high level forecast because, you know, many variables are still unknown in November. This next slide provides the items that school board members indicated on the survey were non-negotiable or should be held harmless. Almost all indicated that compensation was important, with mentions of salaries, step increases, differentiated pay. No class size increases was identified, as well as staffing ratio allocation and needs-based staffing being maintained. There was also a mention by one of you of the that arts programming should be upheld. The indicated budget priority themes based on the categories provided in the survey are as listed. Under compensation, several items: STEP, MSA, teachers, IAs, PHTAs, family liaisons, which were previously called parent liaisons, and bus drivers. Under student achievement, we saw learning loss gaps, reading, get to green, ESOL staffing, AAP, both middle school and AART, special ed review, and literacy. The operations responses included major maintenance, like infrastructure and personnel both, outdoor learning, bathrooms, school needs-based administrative staffing, and quite a few of you mentioned counselors, nurses, social workers, psychologists, professional development, telemental health in the social emotional category. The equity responses included diversity recruitment, PD again, needs-based staffing, translation services, ESOL, AAP, and employee benefit parity. And in the other category, we had things like high school security assistance, technology, the special ed audit, and again, professional development. And now I'll turn it back over to Budget Chairman Corbett Sanders to lead the discussion about the school board priorities for FY23.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Burden. I did want to correct myself. We are actually scheduled to go until 5:30 for this portion of the work session. I asked for a consensus if we could go till at least 5:45. That would give us 15 to 20 minutes for a quick dinner break, and then we would come back. Can I get a consensus from around the table if they can support that? Excellent. So that will be the time frame in which we're working. And my first one up on deck is Ms. Daranack Koufax, and Okay, and I will ask if we can see the, I see Dr. Anderson will follow Ms. Keys-Gamarra. And if I can see the pictures up on the screen, that would help. Ms. Keys-Gamarra? The themes?
I don't have my thing on. I agree with what is listed there. These are really continuing themes, but I think with the program review, one of my continuing concerns has been the inequity to access to certain programming across the county. So that would be a priority for me to look at that and to figure out how to serve some of those communities who have not had access to that programming. And that is my comment. I'll save my 2:22 so we can get to dinner.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. I have Dr. Anderson followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. One of the things that we just spent a lot of time discussing is how do we plug in gaps where there seems to be, some hemorrhaging. I've said this multiple times, so this is no surprise that one of the things that I'm advocating for is needs-based administrative staffing. Because in Mason District, our turnover is high for a lot of different reasons that don't need to be outlined here. But there's definitely a workload matter, and I think that we need to take that under account. And even in my document that I turned into you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, I talked very clearly in terms of how the staffing at middle school is the same in terms of assistant principals. And I don't understand how the staffing, let's say for a school like Poe, is the same as it is for a school like Glasgow when Glasgow has twice the number of students. Similarly, for a school like both Glasgow and Poe with high levels of FRMs, high levels of EL students, high level of, I'm sorry, I think I said ELL students, that brings some additional challenges. I think we need to take a look at what resources that those schools will need in terms of human resources to keep them going, because some spaces are easier to get just to the instruction without the obstacle of all of the challenges that may be present. So I'm really hoping for some consideration for that administrative staffing to be needs-based. Similarly, the way that we are assigning counselors, psychologists, social workers to our schools. I know that the superintendent had talked about doing a needs-based assessment based for the ESSER funds, because this is something that I brought up then. I'm hoping that that continues, because we have some schools that have daily threat assessments being completed, daily deployment of the bid teams. And we have some schools where that does not happen. I think some consideration for the needs of those schools need to be outlined in our budget. And also our parent liaison. I'm very concerned that that job has overextended itself from its original position. And you all, the entire board agreed to have this be reviewed during this school year for this budget year as a follow-on from the last budget that we adopted in May. So I'm hoping that also we have that information so that we can determine how that gets embedded into this budget. And I don't know how much time I have left, but I will.
You have 22 seconds. Go for it.
I will yield that at this time. I want to take a breath and look at my list again.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I now have Ms. Cohen, followed by Ms. Omesh.
I agree, Dr. Anderson. I'm going to try to get it all out really quickly. I do want to make sure that when we see this budget, that we are seeing some response to the AIR interim report and the JLARC study. I am very hopeful that we're going to see a response, and maybe it's elementary SPED department chairs, which we've talked about pre-pandemic ad nauseum, but we have got to get some support in there. In addition to that, but related, is staffing ratios for our related service providers. In particular, I will say time and time again, my constituents are coming to me with problems with ATS, and yet saying ATS is amazing, but there are so few people that they're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks to even have software updated on devices, to get materials that are in a form that their kids can actually interact with. And we're talking about direct access to the curriculum. And if we cannot have people on staff who are speaking that language, we are not doing our job. Diversity recruitment, I just want to make sure that we're always making sure that we're talking about ability when we're talking about diversity recruitment. The other is definitely STEP. I know I've been talking a lot about it the last few years, but just for an example for the public, having a conversation the other day with a bus driver who's been here 16 years, but is still on step 10. And the impact of that on retirement is exponential. I had a conversation the other day with a 63-year-old IA who cannot retire, which after our last conversation, we don't want her to. But we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by our support personnel and all of our staff. And the step increase is, I think, one of the #1 ways to do it. Major maintenance. I am super concerned. We've worked really, really hard this year with the joint CIP with the county to work. I think there'll be some good news that you guys will get to hear about the county wanting to have more support for us in our capital improvement plan, but also in our major maintenance backlog. But the major maintenance backlog is only going to get better if we actually have the people to implement it. We hear Mr. Plattenberg tell the story of the number of plumbers at the Pentagon versus what we have here in FCPS with more square footage. And I mean, we're just drowning. Our maintenance folks it's not even watching pots. It's which one is, catching fire, not boiling over. So we've got to get more support there. And I think that definitely comes back to the encouragement I've had about increasing our talent and acquisition folks. So our TAM team. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cohen. Now, Ms. Omesh.
Thank you, and thank you, Karen and Elaine, for trying to consolidate all of our input. A couple of things. First, items, next, process. Okay, so items. #1, this has been years of a conversation, looking at our parent liaisons, echoing what Dr. Anderson said, and seeing if we can finally get them off hourly and value them in the way that they've been delivering. So that's one. #2, translation remains an immense area of great need and shortcoming. So echoing Dr. Anderson on that, I hope we can add some monies there. Third, on the needs-based staffing piece, we remain behind on best practice ratios. The first cycle, 2 cycles ago, we had a follow-on about social workers, psychologists, trying to get a plan moving forward. I'd really like to see that reflected now that we're 2 cycles in front of that and we haven't moved on it. And then finally, in terms of items, I think it's a great opportunity for us to look at what we've already allocated in ESSER and actually look at where our Title I and Title III funds have been going, where we've fallen routine, just stagnated kind of in what we expect to do. And then considering how those can be repurposed based on what we're doing in a school-based level from an equity perspective. So I offer that as we look ahead to the budget process, even considering things like academic stipends for those kids who we already know, predictably based on the data, are going to struggle more and have been throughout the pandemic. So those are my 4 items. In terms of process, so #1, we saw with AIR how effective it was that they were able to do a survey in multiple languages across our division and capture such a big percentage of our staff. I think it behooves us to consider as a board a needs-based or a needs assessment process. We continue to have these conversations. I say this every time when we do the budget, but we have these conversations. A couple board members will bring things up. Maybe it'll be reflected. Some staff member might remember something to add, without doing a proper analysis from an equity perspective of which monies are going to which populations, what percentage of our community is that, are we being fair about where we're putting money relative to where we have or have not put it in the past, and how are we preventing the gaps and expected shortfalls that we're going to see. So my suggestion, I would really urge our budget chair and vice chair for this time to consider doing that, and we should take it just as seriously as we do the budget allocation process. I would love for our equity team to lead in something like that, where we're planning in advance to see where those gaps are, because that's how we find ourselves with severely mismatched staffing ratios over time, and surprisingly so in particular pockets and not others. So that's my biggest point of advocacy this entire budget cycle, because the items will come from that. We're all bringing forth items we think are missing, but if we don't have the underlying process in place in the long term to get those needs right, we're not gonna get those items right, and we're gonna continue exacerbating gaps. Thank you.
May I just ask, as the budget chair, a clarifying question? Are you suggesting that we issue a survey to the community or to the staff regarding budget priorities?
So my suggestion would be both. I think we rely on our public hearings in a way where we believe that captures public input. I beg to differ quite passionately, but AAR did it for both, and I think we'd benefit from that.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. So I now have Ms. Marin. And Ms. Pekarsky, you'll follow her.
So I only listed 2 things on my budget input. One is this, the literacy plan that we're going to be talking about later tonight. This is the beginning of what could be a solution to many of the challenges some of you have already voiced. Early intervention, appropriate, accurate literacy instruction based on the science of reading. If we are not willing to commit to what this plan is starting to generate, we should probably just adjourn now and save ourselves a whole lot of headache later tonight. We must, if we are going to ask the school division and the superintendent to present these analyses and these plans, we must fund them. That means creating and providing training that is required for every elementary school core teacher, the SPED teachers, the elementary reading specialists, and teachers new to the profession, required professional development for our leadership team members, assistant SUPs, executive principals, regional assistant principals, principals and assistant principals. The training that's required on how to identify reading delays and disabilities for every elementary school teacher. The specialists, teachers new to the profession, as well again as the leadership team members. The time for staff to participate. This planning time issue, folks, this is like the biggest nugget we could possibly have. If we can figure out how to get our elementary school teachers more time, they're getting the training and seeing the modeling by expert teachers. They're intervening. Hey, we also can maybe de-stress our teachers. They don't have to be out so much. We don't have to have so many subs. Our students also could perhaps get some extra time doing other things while the teachers are planning. I mean, again, this is going to be as usual, with the budget, right? Competing priorities. Where do we get the biggest bang for our investment? It's the early years. 20 years ago, the U.S. Department of Education, I learned every dollar invested federally produces 7 on that investment. That data point is still correct for that. We start young with the kids, K2, get them instructed appropriately to learn to read and write and be literate. And we reduce the problems that go on and on. That's where we keep saying there's no movement in our test scores for certain populations for reading attainment, for 4th grade, for 8th grade, graduating. It starts young, it starts with a literacy plan. If we are not going to commit to funding what we're asking the superintendent to present to us, I think we have a really big problem. The second thing I will talk to briefly is funding for outdoor learning, environmental education, environmental sustainability. We've seen a real thirst for that come up. Our Get to Green team has proposed a plan to expand it from currently 2 people that run the whole program for 188,000 students and supporting those educators to make it more robust. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take your 1 second back. Appreciate it. So now we have Ms. Pekarsky, followed by Ms. Derenak-Kovacs.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate seeing kind of the compilation of where everybody is, and I think it's probably a good sign that many of us happen to have the same priorities as we are walking into this budget season. For me, I definitely think, compensation is something we're kind of piecemeal talking about, and we couldn't do as much as we wanted to last year with teacher compensation, so that will definitely be a priority. And of course, our student achievement, see where we are this year, how we are using our ESSER funds, how we are filling in those gaps, and what we are going to do to ensure that we keep closing the gaps that existed before while also closing those pandemic gaps through things like our literacy plan, absolutely. But also what we are going to do, how we're going to invest in summer school next year, because I think there may be an interest from parents to actually send their kids now that they've had kind of, a break after virtual. So I do wonder if we're going to have increased interest and need for that. I'm also very interested in continuing to ensure that we are funding our STEM and STEAM programs, part of which Ms. Marin brought up, our Get to Green programs. And something that, I think we're going to have to, in some way, discuss is our meals. When does that federal grant actually run out for paying for meals for all students?
It goes until the end of this school year, so June, 30th, 2022.
I just put that out there because, I want to put it out there and hear what people think about this. I know that many in our community have come to depend on those meals, and it is definitely an equity issue. And I don't know, how that fits into an overall budget, or if this is something we need to think about and pursue, extending what has already been offered, maybe not to everyone, but it's something I've put out there. I'd love to just hear where my colleagues are on that as we're looking at next year. So I think those were kind of my top line items, and okay, I'll give you the rest back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Derenak-Kofax, followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, and then Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. I too appreciate having all these themes in one point. I did put on there, I still enjoy, and I share this with you, the 2x2, so I felt there's opportunities to do that at some point as this budget process goes on, because I think that while this is good, I think 2x2s often yield the opportunity to have more in-depth questions answered as the process goes on. So sharing with my colleagues where I was coming from, I think compensation, we need to really look at that step because we haven't looked at it in years, and if we can do both a step and an MSA, we have to continue to bring forth funds for programming enhancements that we already started. And from an equity perspective, this includes we have 2 more year funding for our advanced academic resource teachers and enhancements to our Young Scholars program. ESOL programming, I know that's being funded and looked at from various places, but we really need to make sure that this is meeting the needs of these children, because as our special ed audit noted, it may be not doing that and they may be being labeled in one way. I also put down there, because it never hasn't happened yet, advanced math in all of our schools, in our elementary schools, making sure we have that. That's also an equity issue. As the newly appointed audit chair, I have found that since 2017, our audit team had recommended, and we know this, but sometimes things get lost. We are at a moderate risk to our school system because we need to increase our capital and major maintenance. At the time when that audit was conducted in 2017, we had a backlog of deferred maintenance of $136 million. So I don't know where we are right there on Dr. Brabrand, and I would like that addressed as well. And that's my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Derenak-Kofax. I think we're starting to hear multiple themes, so it's very helpful. And now we have Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, followed by Mr. Frisch.
I really struggled with this because I feel like there's such a difficult time balancing our current and longstanding needs that are really exacerbated by COVID, our inequities in learning, our longstanding gaps that have just gotten worse, the academic needs of all of our students after a year of virtual learning, and help, short-term and long-term, our compensation, which we need to continue to work on for our teachers. There's just so much there in our student achievement, our student wellness, as we make sure that our students have ways to reconnect and engage and belong, because we know, one of the number one indicators of success is that sense of belonging and connection. And these are such huge needs, especially in terms of needs-based. Special education, I mean, JLARC report, I'm glad Ms. Cohen brought that up, has identified such huge problems, especially in transition, especially in those transition services. And we don't even really, I think, look at long-term outcomes as an ROI on what we're doing. Staffing formulas and other processes, some of which really haven't been looked at for 30 years. And that may end up having budgetary impacts. But then so those are all things, I think, literacy, obviously, if we can, as Ms. Marin said, set that foundation for our students, it is so important. But we also want to look at our budget as to where do we as a school system see that Fairfax promise, as I think you've mentioned, see that portrait of a graduate 21st century education, and how do we build to it? I think part of the reason we've gotten into some of these issues, I'm going to say around special education, I'm going to say our staffing ratios, which haven't been looked at in 30 years, and the fact that we don't staff for inclusion at the secondary level. Some of this happens because I think we spend so much time looking at our current needs now, we don't do that long-term planning. So I guess in this initial budget meeting, one of my big themes I want to put out there is, how do we take care of what we need now in a way that we can build towards that 21st century? What do we want FCPS to look like? And that's the big picture statement that I wanted to put out there, because what I don't want to do is get to the point where we say, I think one of my colleagues brought it up, where do we have our programs? What programs do we want to have? Get to Green, is that something that environmental science, is crucial for what we want our graduates to graduate with? I don't know the answers to that, but what I want us to be mindful is that when we're talking about equity, when we're talking about our budget, how are we measuring our return on investment? What outcomes are we looking at? I think we've learned over the pandemic that standardized testing may not be the best measurements of return on investment in our budgeting. So as part of our budgets, what long-term outcomes are we looking for? And that ties to what do we want to educate our students to be in the 21st century. So it's kind of a big picture thing, but I want to see this in our budget planning. What are we trying to build to? Special ed department chairs, I'm going to go back small. We need those special ed department chairs. We talk about staffing issues and staffing needs at our elementary schools. That is such an issue for our special ed teachers, and we're bleeding teachers because of it. So I'll put that out there. I've got lots more. Save some space for the results from our reports, especially the special ed report. I'll stop. Thank you, Ms. Kilbert-Sanders.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. First, I want to echo Ms. Marin on my belief the single most important investment we can make this year is in implementing our literacy plan. And in addition to the various implementation investments that Ms. Marin talked about, I think it's equally important that we invest in measuring the fidelity of implementation of the plan. Because I'll be frank, and then we'll get into this conversation a bit later, my biggest fear is that we put forward a great plan, and then some students at some schools are going to benefit from it, and other schools and other students will be left behind. So I think that's, as far as my priorities go, my number one priority. And I think I listed it as literacy, literacy, literacy when I submitted my form. I also, like Ms. Cohen, am eager to move forward on compensation, specifically around step increases. I'd like to see us follow through on some investments to take advantage of what we've learned from our special ed audits thus far. And then finally, we consistently see gaps in various forms when we're measuring where we are thanks to COVID. And those gaps frequently are around our ESOL students. So I think we need to look carefully at continuing to make major investments there, if at all possible. And I look forward to having these conversations further with my colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Frisch. You were very succinct. You have 1 minute and 14 seconds left.
All right, everybody should just sit in silence.
Ms. Tolan.
Yes, I'm happy to follow some of my colleagues. I think, I really appreciate what Ms. Sizemore-Heiser said. My biggest concern right now is how do we really work with our students that we have back in our schools and make sure that, we are meeting their needs academically and socially, after we've been dealing with the pandemic and as we move forward. And so a number of the items that, I kind of listed, I think fit into this. I think compensation is a big issue for me because really the best way to serve our students is to have the right people in the classrooms and in our schools. And, we need to make sure that we are acknowledging, what those people are worth. So, I appreciate Ms. Maron's comments too earlier, throughout the evening that we need to be very comprehensive about this and not just, are looking at this area, this area, this area. So I hope we can work with our HR folks to really look across all of these different types of people that we have and make sure that we are compensating them fairly. I'm very interested, of course, in, making sure our kids are excited about what they're learning and, some of these programs that I've seen work really well, across the STEM areas, of course, and supporting, continuing the programs that we've been investing in, our AARTs and our Young Scholars programs, and maybe even bolstering that a little bit more with making sure all of our schools have robust science fair programs and, programs where we're really boosting, hands-on participation in some of these really important activities, particularly as we have more and more kids in our base high schools that are going to be looking for these kinds of activities. And we need to start young with the AARTs and the Young Scholars. Also, as part of this excitement and what we've been looking at with the pandemic, outdoor learning, of course, is something that I would like to see us continue to pursue. And just being creative around transportation. Tomorrow is Bike and Walk to School Day. And, I understand that the person that's been, we have had grant funding for that position for years, and that funding, I think, is maybe going away, trying to investigate that. So just supporting transportation and healthy activities for our kids. Major maintenance, of course, is always an issue, and I appreciate what our joint CIP group has done. I think we'll have some exciting news there. We really need to pay attention to that. And I, of course, as I keep saying, being in Dranesville and having a district that is all along the Silver Line, making sure our facilities folks have the capacity to really dive in and understand the development that is happening across Fairfax County, and particularly with changes that we may see because of COVID and use of commercial office space, et cetera. Our facilities people really need to be on top of this and have the capacity to do it. So I want to look at their staffing for that. And I will stop at that. I guess I need to anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take my 3 minutes, and then we can go back. So, many of you know that I spent the bulk of my career in the technology sector, and I had the benefit of working very closely with the chairman of Verizon. And what he always talked about was ensuring that you protected the center of the chessboard. And that's really where we're at today in public education. We need to ensure that we continue to invest in our resources to ensure that we realize the FCPS promise for every child. And that means that we need to invest in our staff at all levels and in all categories. So I fully support a step increase and increased compensation on market-based process. The second thing is we have to invest in our buildings because that's where our students come every day, or in the infrastructure supporting those buildings in the IT space. And so we need to make sure that we invest in our major maintenance and in the staffing associated with it. And third, we need to invest in the vision for the future. And that means that we need to ensure that every child who walks through our doors has access to opportunities and success. And that means we have to focus on the gaps, focus on the literacy, not only in literacy in the word, but also literacy in math and science. So what I want to see us do with this budget is really focus on ensuring that we realize that promise for every child in Fairfax County Public Schools, while at the same time being willing to take a look at what we've done in the past and said, maybe that is no longer necessary, because we do understand that we are going to be competing for funds for how we realize the FCPS promise. And we know that the best way of ensuring that we realize that promise is in our personnel and in our infrastructure. So what should we not be doing anymore? And what I'd like to see, and I know the next chart will talk about what, having staff come back to us with a realistic understanding of what areas should we not be doing anymore? What do we take off the table? Because by taking some of that off the table, we will also be giving the gift of time to our valued professionals. And so with that, I have 36 seconds left. I see Dr. Brabrand leaning in. Do you have some comments?
No, I was taking notes for now. I'm going to take notes for now and maybe comments at the very end. Thanks.
Okay, we do have a couple of people with their placards up again. If you do plan on speaking more, please, yes, Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Thank you. I appreciate being able to hear my colleagues' comments. And I really want to follow up on what you just said, even though I'm reading my notes, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. We have to look at where we're already investing. I am very concerned about this talk about equity and what that means. And yet, where is the measure? Are we hearing from our equity leads in our schools, our eyes on the ground? That I think that's maybe what you were trying to get at, Ms. Omesh. I'm happy to hear from the public. We do that in our public hearings. But we don't get to hear from those staff members that are working with what they may perceive as inequities every day. And I think that that's a critical part, which is why I wanted to come back. I also want to see, as Ms. Corbett-Sanders pointed out, we've got to look at where the investments are and what is it still working? Because if it isn't, we need to adjust to the changing demographics of whatever we are dealing with. I've sent my newsletter out and I put 3 things as a top priority: the literacy, the SPED review, and also making sure we have specialized programming that deals with some of our marginalized groups. So I agree with what everybody said. I know we're gonna have to make some choices. One last thing, I do think we need some serious investment in our diversity and hiring. We have not moved the needle for quite some time. We need to figure out how to do that. So I will leave my 21 seconds on the table. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. And we are 2 minutes before the time that we extended ourselves. So what I'm going to suggest is that I know Ms. Tolan and I have taken a lot of notes, and what we should do is perhaps pull that all together if you want to offer some of the central themes we've heard this evening, and then we will send that around to the board so that you each can provide input. And what I would like to see us do is have some consensus on that input that we then share with the superintendent as he drafts his initial proposed budget, with the understanding that we do have a statutory requirement to put forth a needs-based budget. I want to remind people of that, because so often what we do is we try to shove everything in to accommodate what we think is the end number. So let's be realistic about what is essential to moving the dial in Fairfax County, or realizing the promise of Fairfax. Ms. Tolan?
Yeah, I mean, I just might add to that, if we were looking at some different themes of the evening, I think, people are really looking to continue some of the efforts that we've got ongoing. Even just a number of people mentioned the ESSER funding. We put ESSER funding where we thought we needed it. So let's watch how that's being, spent this year, and is it working, and do we need to really look at those areas? We've got our special education report. We have the literacy report that we'll be hearing about this evening. We've seen a number of things that have worked well in the schools during, this year as we've been bringing people back. So, we can look through and, certainly compensation is coming up as, a huge theme here too. But we'll look through and compile this from, what we talked about today. And I just really want to thank everybody for sending in the information ahead of time and then, talking through it with us this evening. Ms. Burden, do you want to add anything?
Ms. Burden, can you put up your slides so everybody knows how to get their questions in?
We're going to have to email it to you.
Okay.
Tomorrow. We will get you an email of the link.
Excellent.
That's it.
Well, thank you so much, because you all really did help us pull together everybody's information on a very short time frame, and it's a collaborative effort between your team, Ms. Burden, and the board. So thank you. Dr. Brabrand, would you like to provide any comments now?
Listen, this was very helpful for us. I like doing this early. It's the first days of October. We're still a long way from January. I do think one of the most powerful things I heard that I want to just reemphasize that you're going to hear later tonight, we're doing equity work right now. We've been doing some equity work in multiple areas. This literacy one is one of, I think, the biggest pieces, and I look forward to hearing your feedback about what we're doing there. And I also heard what we're doing well, be clear about it, and let's take that deeper. And if there's things that are not going well and we're not getting the ROI, how can we reallocate them and invest them toward our strategic priorities? I also just want to say to you, I have just begun conversations with the county executive, but we already know in a month the labor market has changed before our very eyes, and we are going to have to make compensation, as everybody said, a real priority. It has got to be a priority. We have reached critical operational thresholds with subs, with bus drivers. We're down in some of our departments. We're down in HR, a significant number of positions, in finance, a significant number, because people are not coming into the marketplace for these positions, and we already have low unemployment. There is a group of people that are still really retreated from the pandemic, out of the marketplace, and are not back in, and it is making it very difficult to hire in every industry. We're not immune, and we have to be clear-eyed. We're going to have strategies around compensation and doubling down on the caring culture. What can we do to have people say, in this era where meaning, right now, meaning of life is so important, how can I do something meaningful and what's powerful to do? And I still think education and public education, K-12, is one of the most impactful things anybody can spend their life doing. And I feel that in my soul, but we're going to help convince our wider community that we need, FCPS needs you to step up and be a part of this family more than ever. So we look forward to getting what you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Ms. Tolan, will share, and then we'll work on the next set of processes, and it'll be January before you know it. And I look forward to our discussion this year. I am also mindful, just to say publicly, the state has record revenue, and it's time for the state, when we talk about restructuring, it's time to restructure the relationship with the state so that we get what we need, and all educators in Virginia get the salaries that they need. We are the 10th, 11th richest state. We're at like 50th for state support for schools. It is a slap in the face, and part of this teacher shortage starts in Richmond, and we've got to get our folks there to step up with us. We've seen some investment in education in the state in the last couple of years that has been helpful, but we need even more at this moment of time. What people have been asked to do in classrooms for the last 18, 20 months or in their homes is above and beyond, and we've got to recognize that. in this new labor market that I don't think is going to go back to what it was pre-COVID. So thanks for the conversation today, and we look forward to sharing with you this budget process as we move forward. Thank you.
This part of the meeting is adjourned. We will take a 20-minute break and reconvene at 10 after 6.
We usually take a 30-minute break, but.
You want to make it 30? We can do that.
Well, that's typical.
Okay, then
so
let's do it at 6:20.
Thank you, Karen.